Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, that's Matt behind the camera. I'm Ben. Who knows what's floating in the darkness behind us, but most importantly, you're
here.
Ben. Hey, Christian.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. Christian Sager, ladies and gentlemen,
Hi.
from Stuff to Blow Your Mind. Christian, it's fantastic you're here today. Well, I don't know if fantastic is the right word.
Okay.
Because today we're continuing our series on serial killers, but not just any serial killer, right?
We're going to talk about uncaught serial killers today. People who have murdered many victims and have not been caught over the years. And you'd be surprised there's a lot more of these than, honestly, we'd all like to think.
Right, exactly. There are some frightening FBI statistics that you can find out about in the podcast that we'll be doing along with this video. Before we continue, we'd like to define what a serial killer actually is.
Right, so to be quantified as a serial killer, it means that you have to have committed at least 3 murders in 3 different locations with what they refer to as a cool down period in between each, right?
Right, and this is based on the earliest definition found in the crime classification manual of the FBI. You will hear people debate a bit about the amount of murders, 3, 4, etc., but the cooling off period is important. This is different in comparison to a mass murderer who will murder 4 or more victims at the same place and at the same time.
Right, or like a spree murderer, which is somebody who keeps going on a continued, I guess rampage would be the right word.
No cool down period.
Right, no cool down.
And so here are 4 serial killers who at this point have not been apprehended.
Number 1, the New Bedford serial killer. In 1988, 9 to 11 women were found murdered just outside of New Bedford, Massachusetts, alongside the highway. Their bodies were decayed and had been exposed to the elements and animals, so there was barely evidence to be found. Most of these women were sex workers who had bad drug problems. In 1988, New Bedford had a pretty bad problem with cocaine and heroin. In fact, one clinic in the area estimated that they were treating up to 400 heroin addicts a day. Now, because it's been so many years since these murders happened, many of the investigators that worked the case have either retired, moved away, or moved up the chain of command and can no longer work on the case. Now, while no one has ever been caught for these murders, there were 3 leads connected to the case, with potential suspects. The first was a local guy named Tony DeGrazia. DeGrazia had a history of sexual assault with prostitutes in the area. There was no evidence, however, connecting him to this case, and in 1990, he killed himself. Some of his family members even speculate that it was the connection to the case that led him to suicide. The second lead was connected to another uncaught serial killer named the Lisbon Ripper. Based out of Portugal, this guy had also killed multiple women in similar ways on the other side of the world. New Bedford, Massachusetts has a very large Portuguese population. Some speculate that the Ripper was moving from one continent to the other, committing murders back and forth. However, there's no evidence to link the 2 cases together. The last lead was a local lawyer named Kenneth Ponte. Now, he was actually indicted in one of the murders. However, like the other 2, there was no evidence found against him. Ponte actually knew several of the victims, and he'd served as an attorney for one of them. District Attorney Ron Pina actually called a grand jury together to look at the evidence against Ponte. However, when some political shenanigans went on in the area, Ponte was set free because there wasn't enough evidence for Pina to prosecute him. Now, after the case, Ponte had a tragic life. He had drug problems, he was caught shoplifting, he was disbarred. In 2007, the police actually went and dug up one of his old homes looking for evidence for the cases. They didn't find anything. And then in 2010, Ponte died. So while many people thought that Ponte was a likely culprit, actually investigators and family members of the victims today say they don't think he was the one who did it. So the serial killer that committed those murders in 1988 has never been apprehended.
Number 2, Pedro Alonso Lopez, also known as the Monster of the Andes. He is suspected of killing more than 350 young women, and I mean children, in 3 different countries, Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia. This case is a little bit different to other serial killers on the loose because Pedro Alonso Lopez has been apprehended before, has even been in jail. Here's what happened. He was first active from about 1969 to 1980 when he was apprehended by Ecuadorian law enforcement while trying to abduct children from a marketplace. Authorities initially did not believe his confession, that is, until he led them to a mass grave of over 50 girls in that country alone. After his conviction, he spent the next few years in prison, at least that is, until 1994, when Ecuadorian law enforcement had deemed it too costly to prosecute him for crimes in Colombia and Peru, and so they released him, and on the same day they arrested him as an illegal immigrant and deported him to Colombia. He was held in a mental ward until 1998, when he was released. There's another unusual part to this story, which is that there is an interview with Pedro Alonso Lopez that you can read online. And in that, he tells a little bit more of his biography. It's a grisly read, and it's not for the faint of heart. He mentions his other close call when he was caught by indigenous people, buried up to his neck, covered with syrup so that the ants could eat him, and a missionary came along and saved him, telling the local tribe that she would take Lopez to the police, and instead took him to the border of a country and let him go. Why did he let her live, you might ask? That's because he is an age-specific killer. His victims, all 9 to 12 years old. As of the time of this recording, Pedro Alonso Lopez is 67 years old. And that may seem old for a serial killer, or perhaps infirm, but keep in mind that these are children. And the last rumors of this man's existence come from 2002, when Interpol released an advisory for his arrest on suspicion of a fresh murder in Colombia. As of now, no one knows where he is, what he's doing, or how to find him.
Number 3, the Connecticut River Valley serial killer. Now, the Connecticut River Valley is just between the western edge of New Hampshire and Vermont. And in the 1980s, there were at least 6 killings there in which women's throats were cut and they were stabbed multiple times by the same serial killer, who then subsequently dumped their bodies somewhere near the Sugar River. Now, the timeline for this serial killer was between 1978 and 1988. The first bodies didn't start appearing until 1985. His MO was essentially to drive around the area looking for women who were alone, isolated, and potential victims. These were sometimes nurses. In fact, 3 of his victims were nurses. Sometimes it was women who were alone at a convenience store late at night. In fact, one of his victims was on a payphone just outside a convenience store, told who she was talking to that there was a strange person driving around the area, and then she was never seen again. Now, on August 6, 1988, this serial killer had killed 6, maybe 7 women in the area. Jane Borowski was a pregnant woman at a convenience store late at night. She was attacked by the killer, stabbed 23 to 27 times. She played dead and was eventually able to crawl to her car and drive for help. Now, the question here is, why did the killer leave her alive when he killed all the other women and dumped their bodies in the woods? Was it because she was pregnant? Was there something else that was different about this case? Now, there's 2 leads in the Connecticut River Valley serial killer case. First is a man named Michael Nicolau. Nicolau was a Vietnam veteran who, in 2005, killed his wife, his stepdaughter, and then himself with guns in their home in West Tampa, Florida. Nicolau had previously been linked to the serial killer case, however, because in 1988, his previous wife, Michelle Ashley, had gone missing from Holyoke, Massachusetts. The investigator in that case called Nicolau, trying to find the whereabouts of Ashley. Nicolau said that Ashley had left the family, that she'd run off with a drug dealer, and that he had been left to raise his 2 children alone. However, after digging into the case more, the investigator found out that during the Vietnam War, Nicolau was known for going on human hunting missions, in which he would take only a knife and go find victims to cut. Later, when Jane Borowski, the only survivor in this case, saw photos of Nicolau, she confirmed that he was the man who attacked her. By that point, however, he'd already committed suicide and taken his wife and stepdaughter with him. Now, the second lead in this case may also point to Nicolau. Gary Westover was a man in the area who had been paralyzed in a diving accident. In 1997, Westover thought he was dying. He was on his deathbed, and he called his uncle in, a former sheriff's deputy in the area, to confess to a horrible act. Years earlier, Westover said, he and 3 friends had gone partying in a van late at night. He and his friends had abducted a woman that evening, murdered her in the van, and then dumped her body by the river in the woods. Now, Westover said that he was forced to participate in this crime, and that over the years, he hadn't revealed anything for fear that his friends would murder him as retribution. The investigator responsible for tying Nicolau to this case thinks that the two may have met at a Veterans Affairs Center somewhere in the area, and that Westover that evening had gone in the van with Nicolau. Reportedly, police have access to the names that Westover gave before he died. However, even if Nicolau was one of these men, that means that there are 2 other people out there that were part of this murder and potentially others.
Number 4, the Long Island serial killer. This unknown assailant is thought to be responsible for the deaths of 10 to 17 people from 1996 to possibly today. The bodies have been found along the Ocean Parkway, a fairly isolated part of Long Island. They've been dead for a while when they're found, and they're all wrapped in burlap sacks. The police don't know very much about this killer other than a few things. They believe it is a male, mid-20s to mid-40s, with knowledge of crime scene forensics, because this killer is meticulously avoiding any compromise or any clues to his identity. They also believe this murderer owns a truck or a van and has an intimate knowledge of the Long Island area. And there's something else here. What if this killer is killing people and putting their bodies away seasonally? What if these murders occur during one part of the year, the bodies are stored somewhere, and then they're dropped along the Ocean Parkway during the colder months, when there are less likely to be people around to see the event? This is not the only serial killer that has been active in the Long Island area. Another murderer named Joel Rifkin was initially suspected of these slayings. However, he denied it in a 2011 interview. And at this point, authorities wonder if the killer has gone dormant or perhaps relocated. In an article for Psychology Today, Dr. Scott Bond believes that the killer may have lived in Manhattan at one point, relocated to another, or possibly gone dormant for some time, similar to the BTK killer or Dennis Rader. And there's one more thing. Why do they believe the killer lived in Manhattan at some point? That's because in 2009, the sister of a victim named Melissa Barthélemy began receiving calls from her dead sister's phone. The police were able to triangulate these calls to specific areas of Manhattan, and they checked the stores, the restaurants, the homes. But whoever this was slipped into the crowd, and there they remain today. Christian, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Ben. I appreciate it.
If you enjoy our show, then you're going to love Christian's show, Stuff to Blow Your Mind. What's some of the stuff you guys talk about?
Yeah, just recently we did an episode on the science of necrophilia and like the psychology behind it, and then also we did a 2-parter on feral children and the sort of history behind that and what that kind of says about being a human being.
That's dark stuff, man.
That's how we do.
If you would like to learn more about serial killers on the loose, then check out the audio podcast that Matt, Christian, super producer Noel, and I are doing in concurrence with this video. Also, is there a suspected serial killer in your neck of the woods? Let us know in the comments or tell us on Facebook and Twitter, where we are Conspiracy Stuff. And as always, our best ideas come from listeners. So if you have a topic that we should cover in the future, email us directly. We are conspiracy@howstuffworks.com.